CEO does a sort of performance review with his new marketing director. So he calls the marketing director in and sits down and, how's your first 6 months been with us? And, had a look at some KPIs and all that. And the CEO said, you know what, I'm kind of concerned about some of your hiring decisions. And the marketing director says, why? I've only hired people that I needed in my team. And the CEO said, you hired a vampire. And they said, yeah, I needed that type of person in my team. And he went, what, a blood-sucking undead vampire? And they said, no, account-based marketing. Count. Yeah, we'll do it. I think this deserves a...
I thought that was really good for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Not much, it would seem.
Not much at all.
Having the same phrase as ever, Adam.
Yes, indeed. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the digital download with our new logo in the top right-hand corner, for which we need to thank Rob. Thank you very much indeed, Rob.
Very professional.
Yeah, it does.
Watch your head, Tim. Watch your head.
We've got our own brand now, haven't we?
No, we have a logo.
That cost us.
I was going to say, we've had a brand for a minute.
And the phone is ringing.
A logo, a brand, they're the same thing. Don't worry about it.
We should do a show about that.
And I'm sure we shall in due course. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's digital download. Some of the guys had a conversation following a call that they'd had during the week, and somebody, and I think it was Eric, had read, "The world is in the middle of a polycrisis. Some are calling it a permacrisis." And what we've seen is that businesses around the world are facing all sorts of challenges at the moment. Economic downturn that is disrupting so many elements of their operations, services, activities. It should be making everybody think about what is the way forward. A good, long, hard look at the direction of the organization, who they're partnering with, who their suppliers are, who their clients are even. A recent report showed that 98% of businesses believe their business model will have to change in the next 3 years. I think that's a truly shocking statistic. Not shocking because I don't believe it, but shocking because almost everybody recognizes that fundamentally how their business operates is going to have to change to be relevant, competitive, profitable, yada, 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 within the next 3 years. And that should be striking fear into the hearts of every business that is currently trading. Because we are stepping out into the virgin snow. These are untrodden paths that we're heading into. It's not like there is best practice that you can fall back on, which is basically just copying people that have already had some success of doing stuff. We are each going to have to find our own way of doing this. So what do we need to do? How are we going to plan for growth in the middle of all of this? How are we going to retain profitability and stay stable as an organization?
Can you just maybe tell me what polycrisis means?
Well, we had a good conversation about this. Allegedly, a polycrisis in global terms means a collection of crises. So we've got political unrest, we've got wars, we've got a pandemic, we've got economic instability, we've got energy security crisis. So all of these crises themselves, which are all pretty damn serious, when they're all affecting daily commercial life, with the severity that they are, it's referred to as a polycrisis.
Wow.
Or some are calling it a permacrisis,
where elements and strains of the results of the combined crises together, the polycrisis, stay for a generation.
Wow. A gaggle of crises.
A gaggle of crises.
I wonder what the collective noun for crises is.
It's called a don't panic.
A cold call.
A cold call
of crises. No, but
I think everybody's already called it a polycrisis.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Problems are occurring in a new way.
Yeah, as Andrew says, for some companies, that's a busy Wednesday.
Yeah.
It's a busy Wednesday. Crikey.
Because for some people, there's crisis and there's lots of crisis.
Yeah, you just don't understand. There's normal crisis and there's like this company's levels of crisis. So can I chip in with your question, which was how do we get out of this?
Yeah.
So five things it comes down to for me, and then I'll shut up. No, I won't. I'll shut up for a while.
No, you won't.
You would never do that.
Five key things that are now more important than ever. They've actually always been important in B2B commerce, but now more than ever, it's not that they're more important, it's that it's more important we truly understand these and understand how to get to the point where the rubber's on the road. Number one, understanding your markets. Number one, understanding the amount of companies that we meet that actually don't truly understand their markets. In a midst of as you've titled it, a polycrisis or a cold call of crises, truly understanding, we meet lots of organizations who've set up a company based on a sector and they sell into that sector. They haven't actually really properly looked into their markets. So that's number one, understanding your markets. Number two, access to those markets. Do we have the required level of access to those markets? Simply having a job or a project for a client that works in that sector does not mean that you've got access to that sector or that market. Simply having, we're big in a particular sector. What does that mean? Well, we've had 2 jobs from a client in that sector. And is that sector important to you? Yes. So do you have proper access to it? Well, no, we have a project in there. So we're kind of big in Japan, and all of that. So do you have an understanding of your markets? Number one, access to those markets. I mean, proper, definable access, the way a private equity company would define access. Number 3, if you have access to those markets, do you have credibility in those markets? I mean, proper credibility. Are you looked upon as a go-to solutions provider, product and services provider, whatever it is? Do you have credibility within the verticals, within the client subsets in those markets? Number 4, do you have deep and meaningful connections within those people that you're credible with who are in those markets that you understand? And I mean proper, deep and meaningful connections, better than your competition that you can actually take to the bank and rely on. And then number 5 is an effective and efficient, sustainable way to convert all of that into bankable, predictable revenue.
So remind me, these are the five elements for success.
These are the 5 antidotes for polycrisis. Oh no, he's writing a blog.
I'm writing the tweets for the.
He's writing the tweets. The 5 antidotes for a commercial polycrisis. And properly understand your markets. Access to those markets, credibility in those markets, deep and meaningful connections. I mean, proper. And I don't mean just I'm connected on LinkedIn. I mean proper. Eye to eye, we understand each other, we love each other, you are our go-to person. And then an effective and efficient, and I think one of the keys here, we used to say a sustainable way of using all of that to generate revenue. Now more than ever, with all of these crises on our doorsteps, an efficient way, an effective way of converting all of that into revenue. And I mean efficient as in, we need to be really, 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 really cute and understanding our costs, the cost of sales, the cost of marketing, the cost of operation, the cost, all of our overheads and all of that. The more efficient we can be in doing all of that is going to give us the edge in our marketplaces.
Sometimes the tweets just write themselves, don't they?
So I really agree with you, Eric. I think those are 5 really great items you've identified there. And the way I'd phrase it is that they're one side of the coin, because that's very much looking outwards at, what's going on. There is then, of course, what you've got to do inwards. And I remember from my kind of MBA, we used this phrase kind of fit and stretch. So
fit and stretch.
Fit and stretch. So the fit is for the outside market. What have I got to do to fit into all of those factors that you've talked about there? And on the flip side, what have I got to do with my organization to stretch it in order to make that fit?
Very
So, you know, as you're talking about there in terms of really understanding the market, I think that's absolutely clear. The flip side of that for us as in an organization is, okay, are we really focused? Are we really clear about what our strategy is? What is our core offering that we're going to the marketplace with? You know, then have we got the resources to support that? Have we got the skills and competencies in our people in order to do that? So it's this kind of duality, if you like, between, yes, looking outside as well as looking inside and what we can do to bring those together.
Very good. Yeah, beautiful. Spot on. Spot on. There are many organizations who've got a long and fruitful life ahead of them commercially, but there are many organizations who've haven't looked at that inward and outward piece and are actually just working towards the end, to be quite honest, because they no longer have a product set or a service set that actually addresses what their markets want these days, but their heads are down and they're trying to keep busy and trying to get work. Understanding all of that, I think, is absolutely key. Leah's putting some gold in here.
Leah's always putting some gold in there. But one of the other things I wanted to point out based on what you were saying, Eric, because you used the word proper a whole bunch of times.
Yeah,
and
sorry.
I think this is I think this is an important thing for people to notice, is that a lot of times we think we're doing these things, or we're doing these things at like a very surface level, and we're not creating real deep, meaningful connections, right? Like, we're connecting with people on LinkedIn and we're like checking a box, but we're not actually doing it properly so that it resonates with people. And so I think it's just a good reminder to say, like, it's not just about checking the boxes, know your market. Okay, I did one customer survey and now I know my market. Do you really? Is that enough? Is that proper? So I think that's another thing we can look at on when we're doing these things. How deep are we going? And are we going deep enough for it to be meaningful?
And I think an example of the depth that we're going to have to go to, being brave enough to say our model doesn't work anymore and we have to redo it. Just like Leah's saying, I see revenue recognition as the driver of experience and infrastructure, but she's proposing a hybrid model with a centralized RevOps leaders and embedded specialists in departments, for example, marketing, sales, and customer service. So that is being, on the face of it, or from the outside, might seem a fairly radical restructure, but actually it might be more in harmony with, as Will said, do we have the resources? Do we have the right kind of internal setup to be able to take this to market and convert it?
The word I bring, Tracy, with what you were saying there in kind of purpose is intent. It's one of my favorite words, because, you know, when we have an idea, are we actually really following through? You know, it's not just a tick box exercise. We are really serious about this, and we're going to be focused in the way that we're going to go about it.
Oh, it's all got a bit somber today, hasn't it?
You start with Polycrisis. What other way do you think you're going to go?
Exactly.
I wanted to go back to the initial statement. We said 98% of business leaders believe their business model needs to change. So my question is, what about the other 2%? I'm reminded of an old quote from the movie Moonstruck. Olympia Dukakis. Snap out of it. Isn't business always about change?
Yeah. Why is it such a shock that 98% of business leaders think their business model is going to change in 3 years? Surely 100% of business.
2% don't.
Yeah.
There's a great. I mean, we've heard so much about VUCA. You know, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we live in. And there's a really, I'll put it in the chat afterwards, there's a really good website you can go to, which has this thing called the World Uncertainty Index. And it charts back uncertainty for about the last 30 or 40 years. You know, and what you can see in the last kind of 10 or 15 years is a significant up-ramping in terms of the uncertainty that's out there. You know, these events that are coming along, you know, the things that nobody could predict are just coming along with a much more regularity. So I think one of the things that's key for organizations, and it's a little bit glib and easy to say, but we have to live with this uncertainty. We have to become more agile. We're not going to have all of the answers. We're not going to be able to predict what's going to happen, in 6 months' time, let alone a year or 2 years' time. So part of it is around kind of planning different scenarios that you think might happen, but not just focus on one, and then being prepared to switch depending on what eventually comes about.
I haven't done that for a long time, but there was...
Eric, you used to work for a company, didn't you, where they had a risk register at the board level?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked with companies. So every organization's got a risk register. It's part of their sort of fiduciary responsibility to their investor or whatever it might be. And it's good business to have a risk register, right, at board level. But I've seen some risk registers where it was a tick box exercise where I remember. I think I've shared this maybe even in this live stream where a new CEO came in, and after their 100 days, they came in and they said, "We spend about half an hour on this risk register every month at the board meetings. It's pretty much a waste of time. Can we slash some stuff out of it? I mean, item number 1, global pandemic. I mean, that's never going to happen, right?" And I mean, let's just get that rubbish out of there and let's just focus on revenue and markets and staff and all of that. But I've also worked with organizations where I've joined boards, and scenario planning as part of the risk measurement and risk assessment process was a thing they took really, really seriously. Scenario planning. What if? So let's choose a different theme. And also I like the fact that it wasn't just confined to board level. They brought in, as Leah said, experienced specialists to be part of these working parties, to plan these scenarios, plan them out, create the headline. What are the big things that could go wrong with our organization in our markets and what we do in our products and services, and what are the big things, and play them out in a series of almost like role playing. Let's just work them all the way through and let's see what the potential outcomes can be, and then we can identify what we can do if we feel this is a realistic threat to alter course, pad, take a different course, whatever it might be. Scenario planning, love it.
So I'm teaching a business fundamentals class right now, and next lesson is teaching the students the basic SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the typical reaction when we talk about threats from the students really is the hand shrug emoji. What can a company do about threats? I cannot control external events like a global pandemic. And the thing that I really try to dig in on with them is, no, you, as a business, as an individual, you cannot control a global event like that. But what you can do is control how you react to it. You can plan for things, and you can plan for how you're going to respond to it. Can you plan specifically for a pandemic? No, but you can plan for a significant business disruption, whether that's a pandemic or a labor strike or political unrest or supply chain troubles. Oh my gosh, we have all of those right now. Let's call that a polycrisis. But what you can do is plan for how you're going to react to these things. And by planning, you're putting yourself ahead of apparently 98% of the other businesses out there.
Good point.
So is it I think it is that kind of planning and that's flexibility. I was reading a book the other day, and they were speaking to the guy who was in charge of Tesco's during COVID, and he said, before COVID struck at the beginning of 2020, our plan in terms of doing deliveries to people was to increase up to 600,000 deliveries over 3 years, from 2020 to 2023. He said within four.
And Tesco is a grocery store.
Yeah, it's like Walmart.
It's the biggest one in the UK, so it's like Walmart.
And 4 weeks into the pandemic, they were doing 1.3 million deliveries.
There you go.
So there is an organization. Everybody got hit with the same problem. They had their plan. This was going to be steady. This was going to be the growth in the next 3 years. This event happens. You can imagine certain things hit the fan in the first couple of days, but they got themselves together. They had a structure. They had an organization. they had a mindset which allowed them to look at this, event which they had no control over in a different way, and to come up with a workable and successful solution.
You know what this is making me think of too, because I've seen this in like contracts so often, is you have all of your like clauses about if there's a disruption to business and weather and all these things, and we're not liable, right? We put all those things in a contract, but we don't actually go the step further of planning. What if that did actually happen? How would we? Maybe I'm contracting myself out of serving my clients in that scenario, but my business still has to run, right? And my business doesn't run without clients. So it was just, I don't know why I was thinking that.
I always think back to ask any business leader if they've got, as part of their risk register or risk planning or whatever, do they have a business SWOT analysis like you were talking about, Rob? And everyone will tell you yes. How many people have said that we did a SWOT analysis and it changed our view of what we need to do because we identified a significant threat or weakness? That SWOT analysis done, in the folder, on the shelf. Let's go to work.
So can we talk about this? Because if minus these 2% of people, but if 98% of people think they need to change their business model, and I think a lot of people, when I agree with Leah, I don't know how much architecting goes into this in the first place, but a lot of people, I think, this kind of go into like, I create a business model and then I run my business model. Like I don't go into it thinking that I have to continually revise my business model. So what are some of the things that people can do on a mindset shift arena, and also in a like tangible, what can I do about this, to shift from, well, crap, I've been running this business model for 20 years. Now I know I have to shift it, but I actually have no idea how to even get started with it.
And I think Gary Vee put out a brilliant video this week. I don't know if I've actually got it set up to play, but I don't know if it will play the audio, because I almost wept. I stood up and applauded because we've been writing content about this for 3, 4, 5 years, and to hear Gary Vee say it, and suddenly everyone now goes,
well,
"Oh, that's
a good idea." Isn't he?
What's that?
He catches up after a bit.
He catches up after a while, yeah, exactly. But he spoke about business truths, and he spoke about that need for business honesty. And I think for me, the businesses that are sitting down with the team, whether it's the leadership team or they want to extend that a wee bit more, I wish they would, and bring in people who can make a difference in the business, and actually sitting down saying, listen, there's some stuff going on right now. It's really unpredictable. We're not the oracles of all knowledge in this world, and actually, we need to let's just get it out on the table. Let's not hide things. Let's not smoosh over with smoke and mirrors and business buzzwords. Let's just start speaking some business truths about our business. And that exactly what Tracy said. I realize that I need to do something, but I don't know what to do. Maybe 10 people will come up with the answer. 10, whatever it might be. Just be honest and sit down and say, it's so refreshing. I never had the chance to work for that. Maybe 1 or 2 people that were in that kind of mode who actually said, well, okay, I might be the highest paid person in the room, but I don't know. I don't know. It's so refreshing. I don't know, but I'm sure we'll come up with the answer.
Have you heard of the company Gravity Payments?
No.
Okay. It's a US kind of like mobile, Rob is saying yes, a US mobile, like banking processing organization, but it's run by a gentleman by the name of Dan Price. And at the beginning of COVID, they had a town hall about how everyone can keep their job. So their intention was for everyone to stay employed throughout the pandemic. They were losing client accounts because everybody was losing client accounts. And it wasn't Dan Price who showed up and was like, this is how everybody's going to keep their job. He's like, everyone from the janitorial staff to me are keeping their job. I don't know how to do that. How are we going to do that? And every single one of his employees stayed employed during COVID. They took a pay cut that they all agreed upon, or they voted on anyway. and with a like payback plan. So once their business came back, all the employees would make back the money that they traded to stay employed during the pandemic. And I was like, this is just such a great example of what could be possible. One, when you are really clear on your intention, like my intention isn't to create a certain amount of profit during this. My intention isn't to, because your intention could be a lot of things. My intention is to keep everyone employed. And as a team, we're going to figure out how to do that. And I think it's still unusual, unfortunately, in the business world for a leader to say, like, I need my team. I need my team to help me figure out how we are going to do this. Not how I'm going to do this, how we are going to do this. Great example.
Andrew says, are you actually saying that business leaders should be honest with their workforce and ask them for suggestions on how to improve the business? Normally, any meeting like that is the most quiet meeting ever. I know what you mean, but I've found over the years that they are pretty quiet if the culture hasn't experienced that before. So if it just becomes the cultural norm where we're in this together, then those meetings are usually a bit more normal, normally a bit more loud.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference in the scenario with like a Gravity Payments, whose company is built on, this is a people company, right? Everybody makes, like, there's a very small window of what people make in terms of their salary, right? So the difference between someone who cleans the toilets and the CEO is very small, right? They have on-site childcare. They have, like, it's a people company. It's been built that way. So yeah, what they sell is like financial technology. They're a people company, and people go to work there because of that, right? And so if you are historically not a people company and you treat your people like batteries, they come, you plug them in, you suck them dry all day, and then you send them home, and you do that for years. And then you hit a pandemic and you're like, well, now I need the help of all these people that I've been ignoring for all these years. It is probably going to be a pretty quiet meeting. Because why? There's no team here, right? Like, yeah. So to act like a team all of a sudden is like, well, why are you asking me for this now when we haven't really been a team all along?
Can I just point out something that's beautiful about forums like this? I know we're on them all the time, and I know we've seen them all the time, but is in New York. Barry Boyle is in Udney Station in Aberdeenshire, and they're exchanging books and reference materials for business improvement, and that's never going to get old. Never going to get old. Two people met,
and you've got, there's some amazing comments. I mean, the thing is you can't go through all the comments because we just don't have time to do that. But there's just so many amazing comments.
Rob Terrell's putting some gold in here. Absolutely, old-fashioned whiteboarding with sticky notes and breakout groups. yeah.
And it's those preconditions. I mean, you talked about culture, but if you've got a fairly poisonous culture, if you've got one where you haven't got the psychological safety that people feel that they can kind of speak up to power as well, and there isn't the trust that exists, then suddenly having an open town hall and asking people to express their viewpoint, no surprise, Andrew, exactly as you say, it's that those will be the quietest meetings because there's a culture of fear, or certainly people haven't bought into the culture of those types of organizations.
Well, and I think it goes one level past safety, right? Because I feel like I've been in spaces where like I probably would have been safe to say something, but I didn't. And it's because I didn't actually care about fixing someone else's problem. Right? It was like, I'm like, this is your problem. It's not my problem. It hasn't been like huge. The whole time. It hasn't been our problem, right? It's your problem. So now you want to use me to fix your problem. If you want to use team to fix our problem, because I actually believe it's also my problem, then we have somewhere we can go.
And that's one of the powers of leadership, which is the fact that what happens is that as you get promoted, you're probably actually further away from the business. And actually, the skill is, as Robert says, is to get people in the room and to use the people who are at the coalface to come up with the ideas, because you get twofold, which is first and foremost they're the coalface, therefore they come up with the ideas. The second thing is that they buy into it. So you've got this buy-in to the process, and then they usually come up with the ideas, say they're happy with it, and then go and implement it.
There's if someone knows the exact measurements of this is, I hate doing this, but there's a wonderful story about Volvo back in the day who sat everyone down and did exactly that, and said, look, we're looking for efficiencies and we're looking for all of that, and in fact we're going to incentivize you. So if you can come up with, instead of just coming in and clocking in and doing what we ask you to do every day, if you can think of really cool ways to chop a couple of hours off or whatever. And one of the guys, he was relatively senior in terms of workforce seniority in the painting division. And he sat down with a little piece of paper one day and he said, let's get it down to brass tacks here. Like for every 1 litre of paint that we use to paint a Volvo car, we probably lose about 1/4 of a tin in overspray. That 1/4 of a tin, based on annual spend of tins of paint, is millions and millions of krona. Millions and millions of krona. So if we can chop that off or even make a dent in that, we can save millions and millions of krona. So he went away and worked up with some stuff, and he came back and he said, magnetized paint. Magnetized paint. Well, don't be so ridiculous. Well, our paint's got metal flakes in it. Why don't we magnetize the paint? Get some scientists in, pay them a few bob to come up with a system where we can magnetize the paint. Revolutionized painting for automobiles. Now everyone does magnetized paint because you almost minimize or eradicate any overspray with paint. Put robots in there as well to do it, and wow, you're in absolute clover. He became a millionaire, that guy, because they gave him a percentage of the save.
There's the bloke that came up with the idea to put matches, and you get sandpaper on one side, and he came up with the idea to only put it on one side. And he came up with the idea, and he said, if you give me a percentage of the savings, then I'll give you an idea. And they did that. Yeah,
incredible. But not everyone's going to get percentages and millions of krona, stuff like that. So.
Sometimes it's nice to come up with the idea and say, I did that.
Yeah, but I mean, if the whole driver behind all of this is company pride. If you like working here, let's make it a place where we can continue working here for years. Let's make it better. Let's get to the point where we're paying bonuses out every year, because that's the kind of position we want to be in. We want to be creating a great place to work that you want to work in, that you tell people is absolutely great to work at, and you actually get nice bonuses every quarter or every year or whatever it might be, and we have a great working environment. That's the win. That's the win, maybe.
So what percentage do you think of this 98% of CEOs that have said they will change or want to change their business model, do you think actually will? And
it's a great question, Alex. Could we get the audience to put in what percentage of the 98% do the audience think are going to make any change at all?
Because it was the comment was 98% have realized that they're going to have to change their business model.
So your question is, how many will do something? Sorry, Alex, to jump in.
My take is that actually most of them, or some of them will, but how many will do so voluntarily and actually in a proactive way? How many will do it because they're kind of forced to, and they'll kind of get dragged along and they will make some? And then how many in the end will actually perhaps not make it, but then be out of business?
Yeah. Or how many realize they will do it? They've kind of made the decision to do it, but then they realize culturally, they haven't created the culture in order to be able to drive that kind of change quickly enough.
Well, and I think there's like a second part of the question of how many will do it, then how many will do it proper.
That's where I was going. How many will think they've done it? How many will tick that box and nothing has really changed?
But we've been through digital transformation because 2 of our salespeople use Zoom now.
Well, and I think this is the thing, right? Because when you're talking about changing a business model, these are more of the innovative things like Leah was putting in the chat earlier, right? This is about thinking innovatively. It's not about changing, oh, now we have one person who's in charge of sales and marketing instead of two people, right? Like that's not changing your business model, right? When you're talking about changing your business model, it's not how do we offer this? Like everything Will was talking about at the beginning. How do we assess these fits? And then how do we stretch to fit into those places? And we're stretching to fit a different thing. So that doesn't exist if you aren't doing new stretching, right? And if you aren't doing new stretching, you don't have a new business model. So don't check the box.
New statement from Tracy Borison coming out on the Crux Company page. I think it's out if you don't do the thing.
There's just a lot of people who don't like to do things. They like to pretend they're doing things. But if you just pretend to change your business model, it's not going to fix the problem. The reason you think you need to change your business model is because we're living in this new environment that demands we have a new business model. So surface level, changing our business model doesn't actually fix the problem. And then if you are going through all the exercises, I think it was Leah who was talking about self-awareness earlier, right? Like you have to, the leaders of these organizations can't achieve a new business model unless you're self-aware enough of the reasons that keep you as an individual attached to your current business model, which a lot of it is I created this and it was good. And now I'm like too attached to it to let it go. Right. And that's fair. It's like having a baby, right? It's reasonable to be attached to that. And if you want that baby to grow into a teenager, there's something else you need to give it in order for that to happen.
Enter Nicholas, stage left.
Yeah, I know. It would have been perfect, but he's still sleeping.
I just wanted to comment on Alistair's comment. I think 30% of smaller businesses will fail in the next 18 months. That would be an improvement. Statistics say half of all small businesses fail within 5 years. So if it's only 30%, I think we're going places.
Yeah, he was trying to be very positive there, Rob.
Yeah.
I think
there's an important note for small businesses as well, is most small businesses are structured like large businesses. And they have, by nature, more agility available to them. But when you start to think like a big business, then you deny yourself the access to that agility. So theoretically, small businesses could come out of this on top. We could get more small businesses staying in business, but not if we're thinking like a big business. We need access to those innovative thoughts. Right? Innovative ways of doing things. And shall I say, like, to some degree, I've been thinking about this concept for a while now of like research and development in business, right? People spend a lot of money in research and development on technology. But what if we spent time, effort, energy, and money on research and development for how my business is going to sustain a polycrisis, how my business is going to market in the new digital environment, how my business is going to take all of these wonderful salespeople who have great sales skills in the analog space and move them into digital. What if we had the mindset to experiment with those things and say, equally like I give my technology department R&D money, I'm going to give my business R&D money with a mindset of R&D to keep us growing and thriving.
In theory, that's what a learning and development department should be doing.
In theory.
Or HR.
But what if they were doing it proper?
But the challenge is that organizations are fundamentally risk averse. So what organizations want is best practice guides that they can follow, written by large consultancies, to minimize and mitigate the risk of doing something, in quotes, wrong. The problem with that
mitigate the risk or lay the blame?
Well, yeah, a bit of both potentially. But I think that the challenge is that we are heading into uncharted waters here. And because of that, there is no playbook for what needs to happen. Organizations need to be brave and try lots of different things to see what works and what doesn't. You can't wait for a stick in the mud, old-fashioned, slow to turn and develop things consultancy to give you a playbook on something which won't work by the time, even if it's the right stuff, things will have moved on by the point that they're in a position to be able to help you implement that. So it requires a change in culture to allow people to experiment and be brave, doesn't it?
I think it comes back to that kind of VUCA argument and the uncertainty. I mean, there's always a level of uncertainty in whatever business context you're in. You know, in the last 10 or 20 years, people will have still have been saying there was uncertainty. It's just that kind of level and the frequency of it was less. You know, if you go back to the Wall Street crash, you know, when that happened, there was a hell of a lot of uncertainty because no one had an experience like that before. You know, so these things, there are kind of patterns. It's how you deal with them, the kind of the resilience that you've got both in individuals and in the organization, and that ability to adapt to the circumstances in which you find yourself.
But can't we? Leah just made a comment about challenger brands. I mean, one of the things that you can do as a business, if you're cash rich or your share price is high, is just go out and you don't have to do anything. You just go out and buy the challenger brands. Because most companies nowadays are built because most companies are based around venture capital. The whole point of that is we're not building a business to last for 20 years. We're building a business to sell.
Mm.
Therefore, if someone turns up with a big enough checkbook that's in crisis, Adam and I have worked and Alex have worked for an organization that went out and spent 30 billion on small businesses because they didn't have the ability to actually do the R&D and do the development themselves. So it is possible to do that. It is. I'm just putting up.
It is possible, and the interesting thing, certainly in the experience that I've seen with big organizations doing that, is when the little organization comes in, they bought them for a particular reason. And once they're subsumed into the mothership, funnily enough, all that competitive advantage that they had, starts to get diluted and diminished because you start getting all of these extra costs of being part of a large organization. Yeah.
It's like the Borg. You get assimilated. Yeah. For those that don't know, it's a Star Trek-y thing, and you get assimilated.
7 of 9.
But I mean, there's when you do mergers and acquisitions, you expect a certain amount of people to leave. But if you're in a situation of a polycrisis, what you'll find is that the people won't leave, because I've seen that as well. In fact, there weren't enough people leaving, so you then actually have to make the people redundant that you've actually just bought because they weren't leaving enough. And that we've seen that experience as well.
But I think what's interesting. And our friend Craig Allen put a post out today about kind of Microsoft and Google shedding a lot of jobs in the last couple of days. I think it's very insightful that, Musk did that with Twitter 2 months ago when he bought it, and everyone said he was crazy. And now you've got some other tech giants who, are following in a similar stream. I think there is something, in organizations at the moment, they've recognized in the last 4 or 5 years, we need to bring our costs down. We want to be able to do more with less, which is a kind of key driver. And there's this kind of outsourcing element as well that starts to come in. So I think, organizations need to look at the kind of broader ecosystem of what's out there. They're probably looking at, okay, what's the things that we really need within our organization? Where are our key competencies? Where are our real strengths? And some of those ancillary things, how do we manage those in a different way? So can we be more flexible and adaptable? Can we outsource this? A variety of other ways that they're looking about how they manage that situation.
Yeah,
I think one of the things that I'm thinking about right now is, like, based on these layoffs and everything, assuming the intention is to be more streamlined, right? That we think we have all of these resources, they're not contributing to what we're doing, or maybe it's a variety of things. But for example, if you get rid of a whole bunch of resources in recruiting because they're not contributing, like, we don't have that many jobs anymore, so we don't need this many recruiters, blah, blah. But if the business intention isn't different, then like we did layoffs, but then what's stopping us from just like hiring back in along the same lines, using the same systems, using the same processes, because that is what happened before. And if we don't use that all important intentionality of saying intentionally, we are trying to create a streamlined experience, then this is also looking at things like how many of us spend X amount of time in meetings that are completely irrelevant to us? Right? How much time do we spend doing, like, I see this in marketing all the time, right? How much time do we spend doing things that don't actually do anything, right? I've seen marketing departments who employ 6 or 7 full-time people to do things that don't drive business. So like, if we're not intentionally looking at the business, the entire business model, to say our intention is to create this type of experience in the market in the most streamlined way possible, but I'm not going to look at my marketing department, right? Marketing, you just keep doing the same things you've always done, but I'm going to like lay off all of my recruiters, right? Like it's not holistic, and you're going to end up in the same pattern because that's the habits we have. We have habits of doing it.
Like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. I'm now intentionally going to push the rock up the hill
with purpose. I'm really of the belief that there's not enough radical reform. I mean, one of the things that that changed my life back in, just when I was a kid studying quality, was reading about Deming, Duran, and Crosby. Now, talk about radical reform. So the statistical quality analysis gurus who in the 1950s, after the war, decided to go into the big car companies in America and give a presentation on statistical analysis and quality and how it's going to change the fact that for the 2 big ones, Ford and Chrysler, 4 out of 5 cars that come off the production line that are supposed to go for sale go back into the factory to get repaired. And now let's examine the costs associated with that and the reworking and the staff that you need to have and the blah and the blah and the blah and the blah and all of that. And let's get to a point where we understand why this is happening, eradicate those problems, and make sure we get down to an achievable target. Can we get down to 2 out of 5, 1 out of 5, none out of 5?
Zero defects.
Zero defects. They came in, they presented their science on statistical analysis and quality and how we can measure all of this and we can make incremental change all across your massive organization. And Ford and Chrysler both said, thanks for coming. That was a great session. Right, guys, back to work.
I get that read work doing.
And just what Leah said about they got on the plane, damaging and across. Where did they go? Japan. They went to Japan, where they were put up in pedestals. So they started spouting their musings and their teachings to the science community, engineering and technical community in Japan. And instead of kind of like chortling and giggling and yawning, Japan said, well, we have very limited resources after the war. We've got very limited skills. We don't actually have a lot of money. And actually, these things could change our commercial lives across our entire industry. We don't need to put a 2-year plan in for recovery. We need to put a 30, 40, 50-year plan in for recovery starting here. They got to the point where, as Leah said, where there was Japanese cars were so reliable coming off the product lines that in the 80s, you can see the YouTube videos, they had Japanese car bashing parties in the NFL stadiums where you could rent a baseball bat and go in and spray paint and smash a Japanese car. Because, if I go out and I have to spend $15,000 on a Ford and it's just got all the basic kit and it's going to break down in 2 months, or I can buy this Datsun or Nissan and it's got more kit on it and it's got a guarantee that it's going to be okay for 3 years and it's never going to break down, and it's $11,000. That's what loads of people were doing. To absolutely change the dynamics. There's a brilliant story and there's a brilliant video on this. I'll see if I can find the YouTube clip where they walked into the headquarters of Toyota about 10 years after Deming was inaugurated into there, and he actually was based there. He had an office, and in the office was a 40-foot high mural of the chairman, and on the other side in reception was Deming, 40 foot high, because he changed a complete country's commercial outlook through statistical analysis, through radical reform. In the 70s, the president of Ford, he was one of the Fords, was invited across to Toyota as a guest for a week to tour around all the factories and the plants. And he brought a team with him, and they were taking notes. And, you know, he couldn't believe that their gearbox failure rate was so minimal compared to Ford's, which was huge, right? Because their tolerances were all out. These were measuring all of these. And there's a brilliant YouTube clip where he sits in the boardroom with the president of Toyota, who doesn't speak any English. He's got a translator. And he says, "Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to tour and get the inside track on all of your how you do it. But I have to ask, you know, why have you been so open with all of your secrets and all of that? And, you know, we're just going to go back and copy these." And the little chairman turned and in Japanese said very quietly to his aide, who said, "Mr. Chairman says, no problem. We're already 5 years ahead of you. By the time you catch up, we're going to be 15 years ahead of you. So take what we've got now, because it's going to be outdated pretty soon."
Brilliant. Love it.
There's the famous story, isn't there, of an American company had ordered the first shipment of things that had been manufactured in Japan. And they said, "We won't tolerate more than 2 in a million failure rate." And when the directors of the Japanese company came over to deliver the first million things, they said, "Here are the million things, and here are the 2 failures." because they simply couldn't understand the concept of selling something which had a chance of being faulty.
Yeah. Incredible. Robert Matson says, "Going from a 1981 Pontiac to a 1988 Acura Integra was a life-changing experience."
Yeah.
Eric, you were sharing that story. It brought me back to my undergrad days. I was in a product operations class, which I had no interest in at all. But one of the things that they had us read was a fantastic book, The Goal. And I still go back to The Goal time and again with all of the different learnings from it. It's so much more than just a product operations. It's really just a continuous process improvement guidebook done in a fantastic story format.
Mr. Goldratt was, in those kind of improvement cycles terms, an underrated rock star, to be quite honest. He really was. Yeah, he was phenomenal, genius level.
It's a great novel. So, Polycrisis.
Well, we need a poly solution.
Polycell.
Polycell.
Plaster over it.
Plaster over the cracks. I love it.
I think that
poly brochures.
Poly brochures, yeah.
Solution is one word.
That's what we need.
The solution is bravery. Organizations need to be prepared to try something that they haven't tried before. They need to be prepared to try something new. Because
I think when we're talking about like people being risk averse, right? Being risk averse, continuing to be risk averse is going to be more risky. So we now need to incorporate more risk in order to not be blockbuster. Right? So I think it's really interesting because when you talk about the concept of bravery, it's very much like an individual thing. It's like a thing a person can be. And when we talk about a business organization, it's really about saying we accept a higher level of risk. We accept a higher level of risk here. You don't have to accept a higher level of risk everywhere, but we intentionally accept a higher level of risk here because our expectation is that it's going to pay off in this arena. Will everybody be 100% correct all the time? No, it's like any investment you make, right? Like, do I have a 100% guarantee that if I invest in 1 million units, I'm only going to have 2 of them that have a deficiency? No, you trust, and you trust people, right? So kind of going back to what Eric was talking about, his antidote to the Polycrisis, all of these pieces are about people, right? It's not about just looking at things from a business strategic level. It's about looking at things from a people level. So how can we take that concept of an individual human being brave and bring it into our risk profile for the business?
Tracy,
and everybody will have a different
I think it's more than just risk. I think it's permission to fail. And failure is so beaten out of us as we matriculate through school that there's no way we then enter the workforce and say, yes, I'm ready to take risks and let some of those risks fail. We've had 20 some odd years of conditioned against that.
I'll come back to Carol Dweck. It's open and fixed and open mindsets.
Yep.
You know, you've got to be cultivating the organization and the individuals in the organization to have this open mindset, not just to accept the status quo of what's been going on before, to see the opportunities that can come of thinking differently. Now, bravery is part of that, but I think before you get to be brave, you know, you usually need something that's in the back of your mind that says, it's better for me to go forward than it is to stay here or go backwards.
Yeah, it's good advice.
And on that bombshell,
competitive.
I just saw in the comments that Leah was talking about planned obsolescence. And while it, for whatever reason, reminds me of The Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars, watch it and you'll know what I mean. This is what we're planning. And that is not intentional. I mean, some of it's intentional, right? I think with like appliances and things like that, planned obsolescence has been intentional. But if we're looking at our businesses from a thriving, let's keep it people employed, let's keep making the difference we want to make for an ongoing period, planned obsolescence isn't the way to do that, right? And so, like, these are some of the fun things where you can look at, like, look at this process, look at that system, look at what my people are doing here. Is that leading us towards obsolescence, or is it leading us towards an opportunity to go forward, to be part of this future that we're not quite sure what it's going to look like, because quite honestly, we have to create it. This is, it's just another perspective on how we can look at our things and say, like, are we going the way of the dodo? Because that's not intentional. So if it's not intentional, let's just scrap that and be intentional about going in the other direction.
So Blockbuster, I was reading a book last couple of years from a consultant who worked at Blockbuster, and Blockbuster actually paid consultants to come in and say, what's the future? And those consultants pitched that the company needed to go, they were under competitive pressure and they needed to go to, there was this thing called the internet, and they needed to put a proposition together, and the report was ignored. And the reason why the report was ignored was because of the commercial model that they had, where Blockbuster HQ basically had a number of the way it was organized commercially.
How are we going to make late fees on digital? Scrap that.
Yeah.
You haven't rewound this. That's another $1.
So it's you know, it's interesting that even though a company has failed, they did actually go out and they were told by consultants about what they needed to do. So
they were the 2%.
It's going back to the point about if you're going to have the reports, then you need to act on it and have the bravery to act on it.
Kodak were the same in terms of they had developed their own digital camera, but you know, they were making more money out of film, so why bother changing?
Please be kind. Rewind. What a great film. What a great film. Yeah. Please be kind. Rewind.
So, as we approach the top of the hour, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the audience. Thank you, of course, for the people on the panel, and a stimulating conversation, which I think is going to run and run, isn't it? You know, this is something that can't be discussed in an hour. And maybe it is in part contingent on us to help organizations see that the future is within their grasp to be able to create. They don't have to wait for somebody else to do it and then follow them. They can actually create that future themselves. But
have you got an image that says "da-da, to be continued"?
Dun, dun, dun.
Not yet. But I figured that this is going to be a weekly show about this exact topic for the next 6 months. So I shall have one ready for next week. So thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for a fantastic audience with fantastic questions and comments, as always. And We'll see you all next week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Conversation.
Bye.